So pretty recently, it was announced that along with its launching of its new streaming service, HBO Max will be debuting the Snyder Cut of Justice League next year. Now, this is of course Zack Snyder's definitive cut of Justice League, a film that he had to step away from after a family tragedy. Following this, director Joss Whedon stepped in to finish up the film, and as many fans noticed, the final product seemed to be quite a bit different than the ones that they, and presumably Zack Snyder, originally envisioned. People were throwing around jokes left and right, Superman had a weird baby mouth, and Steppenwolf was one of the worst villains that I had seen in a modern comic book film, and that one might still be true in the Snyder Cut, but anyway. Now, will this cut be bad? Will it be good? Or will it be a mixed bag of mostly mediocrity? Who's to say? My money is on the latter though. Now, after Batman v Superman, it kind of felt like DC was wanting to take these films in a new direction, one that focused on more vibrant color palettes, more humor, and something lighter in tone. This resulted in the absolute f***ing U-turn in what initial trailers showed of Justice League and what we actually got. So I assumed after the release of Aquaman and Shazam, Warner Brothers would be focusing more on spin-offs of characters that are not connected to a larger universe, but I guess anything to get that sweet, sweet cheddar cheese. But in watching that film, I think above anything, something I walked away thinking from Justice League is, I really miss Superman. Sure, there are comic books that come out literally every week that highlight the Man of Steel himself, but in a day and age where we can get a pretty great movie about Doctor Strange and Ant-Man, or TV shows about Swamp Thing or Legion, it's so weird that we haven't been able to see a great, tried and true Superman movie in over 4 decades. Now, many of you may be saying to yourself, you idiot, what about Man of Steel? But even with Man of Steel, which does have a large, passionate fan base, I think most fans of that movie would agree that that film is showing a young and inexperienced version of that character. Zod straight up acknowledges this fact.
I was bred to be a warrior, Cal. Trained my entire life to master my senses. Where did you train? On a farm?
And as a result of this lack of experience, a lot of really apocalyptic shit happens in that movie, a common point of frustration among many people who don't particularly care for the film. But this video isn't about Man of Steel specifically. Instead, I want to look towards the future of Superman. Now, let's have a brief little history lesson. Back in 1938, the Great Depression was in full swing, and these assholes started to do some really terrible things to the Jews. Meanwhile, in Cleveland, these two Jewish men first published a comic book featuring this guy, and comics flew off the shelves. Over the years, the character was folded into a daily newspaper comic strip, a radio show, animated cartoon, a movie serial, and a theatrical film. These days, Superman is widely regarded as one of the first comic book superheroes of all time, and regardless of whether he is actually the first or not, it's hard to argue that this guy did not change comic books forever. So why is it, 80 years after this character's introduction and thousands of stories told about this character in the comic books alone, why are studio execs so blown away at how to make a good Superman movie? Because it shouldn't be that hard. Sure, making any movie is difficult, but why is this character so much harder for producers to wrap their heads around as opposed to Batman or Spider-Man? Well, I'm glad you asked, Warner Brothers executive, who for some reason is watching my YouTube channel. Welcome. Looking for inspiration on how to make a good Superman movie? Word of advice while I have you here, please keep Henry Cavill. Word on the street is you will, but I just wanted to make sure. But not only just that, I think there are 5 things that should be in the next Superman movie, and what I think some movies of the past have gotten right, and what some have gotten very wrong. For the past few Superman movies, I don't feel like Clark Kent has really played that large of a role. Sure, in Man of Steel, yeah, he's in the movie, right there. However, I do feel his role as Kal-El is far more important to that story. But regardless, that's not even really what I'm talking about. From a performance level, Clark Kent needs to be different than Superman. And yeah, I'm not the first person to pick this scene as a good example of this, but I love this moment in 1978's Superman the movie. Christopher Reeve in a few seconds is able to exemplify the exact difference between Clark Kent and Superman. Sure, yeah, it's a few seconds in a 2.5 hour long movie, but it's not just in this scene that this happens. Throughout the entire film, Christopher Reeve's portrayal of not just Superman, but Clark Kent is wonderful. Now, I think it's fair to say that a performance like this in a more modern film, yeah, it's not really gonna work. Christopher Reeve is playing a much goofier character in a film that in and of itself is pretty goofy. Let's look at a more recent example. Let's look at the scene from Batman v Superman in which Clark Kent confronts Bruce Wayne, asking him to comment on the vigilante in Gotham City.
What's your position, the Bat Vigilante in Gotham?
Daily Planet. Wait, do I own this one? Or is that the other guy?
Civil liberties are being trampled on in your city. Good people living in fear.
Now, I think Henry Cavill does a great job as Superman and clearly has a lot of love for this character, but I think his portrayal of Clark Kent could be improved. When looking at his performances when playing Clark Kent and Superman, the only real difference here is a pair of glasses, which is something comic book fans have complained about for years. Clark Kent isn't suddenly unrecognizable as Superman because he wears glasses. Instead, his entire persona changes. I think this is something that Brandon Routh does really well in Superman Returns, a movie that I actually think has a lot of the right ideas about who Superman is. Although Clark Kent is obviously Superman, the two are different characters. And the dynamic between superhero and their alter ego is something that I think has been portrayed really well, not only in other Superman movies, but Spider-Man movies too. Spider-Man was written to reflect the struggles of teenagers and was therefore relatable. And that's something that's endearing about the character. Although Clark Kent doesn't have the same challenges as Peter Parker, he is still a man with obligations. Aside from being a reporter for the Daily Planet, he is also, in many comics, a husband and a father. Lois Lane is a part of Clark Kent's life now, and should be treated as much more than just someone for Superman to save. What are the struggles of a woman who is in a relationship with the busiest man in the world and who can pretty much hear everything? What kind of stress does that put on a couple? Apart from being the strongest being on Earth, Clark Kent is much more than just an alter ego. He is a part of Superman, and we need to see how this life can play into saving the world. Now, at this point, you may be saying to yourself, it's probably going to be a little difficult to have Clark Kent in this next movie because, he's dead. So assuming that we are going to keep Henry Cavill in this role, yeah, that's a pretty difficult thing to avoid. But the good news is, it's comic books. People die all the time. Flash could go back in time, make sure this never happened, or Clark Kent could even stay dead. Either way, I still want to see how his personal life is affected by his superhero life. What is life like as a superhero who can hear someone being killed across the country? Something that I hear a lot about what supposedly makes Superman an uninteresting character is due large in part to the fact that he is kind of perfect, which I have to say that I respectfully disagree. Superman is an alien being that is faster than the speed of sound, who is immensely strong, can fly, has heat vision, enhanced senses, and is also shockingly handsome. So yeah, Superman is all-powerful, but that doesn't mean that he's perfect. Assuming that he is perfect means that there is no lesson that he could learn, or no knowledge that he can gain, which is just simply untrue. In prior films, a lot of the conflicts that we see Superman face are as a result of a physical opposition. Either that or Lex Luthor just kind of shoves kryptonite in front of his face again, which is just, I guess, it's just boring as hell. So the question would be, how do you pose a threat to the most powerful being on the planet? Well, the answer would be, for a lot of writers, you give them someone equally powerful to fight. People like General Zod, Doomsday, or even Nuclear Man are examples of this.
Stop! Don't do it! The people!
Now, although there definitely may be a time and place for this type of contest, it has been beaten into the ground on the big screen. Watching two evenly matched people just kick the shit out of each other for 45 minutes, throwing each other through buildings, that gets boring pretty quickly. And instead, I propose a different type of conflict. In the 1998 graphic novel Superman Peace on Earth, we see a different type of challenge that Superman must face. In this story, Superman attempts to solve world hunger by providing aid to nations in need. Now, eventually, he arrives in a country whose militarized government warns against his help, and he is forced to take physical action. But as a result of this, he learns that not every problem can be solved with brute force. Now, there are things that are literally happening in this world right now that I don't know if Superman could really be that much of a help. And I'd argue that these types of issues serve a much more unique threat. And while some people will argue that Hollywood needs to stay away from confronting the real world, I would argue the exact opposite. What's one of the main things that people say that they love about The Dark Knight, a film that many think is one of, if not the greatest comic book movies of all time? A lot of people say they love how real and dark it is. Well, that's a movie that, in 2008, mind you, confronted domestic terrorism and the dangers of involuntary government surveillance. I think that's why so many fans found the comments from Warner Brothers concerning. Do you want to know how to make Superman relevant? Have him confront issues that are actually happening in the world right now. I think examples of comic book adaptations that have done this really well would not only be Black Panther, but Watchmen as well. Those are both stories that confront real world problems and are better off because of it. And with many of these issues, Superman's strength or speed would probably do very little to help. Sure, when audiences want to go see these types of movies, they want to see big, bombastic action between two super beings. I'm not saying that Superman doesn't have to stop bad guys or save people. What I am saying though is Superman hasn't endured for 82 years because he's strong and can punch really hard. I think what's made Superman so popular is his morality and not really his strength. Remember that time after The Dark Knight where a lot of movies just became dark and gritty and it kind of sucked? I don't want to see that happen to Superman. Superman is a beacon of everything good in the world, so seeing a movie ponder whether or not he should save people seems really strange to me, but I digress.
What was I supposed to do? Just let him die?
Maybe.
Something that makes Superman who he is, and I would argue the same point for Batman as well, is their moral code. Watching them break that code, especially in their first introduction, seems a little too soon for me. I think this is something that a lot of fans have loved about Steve Rogers in the MCU. Although Superman and Captain America are obviously two different characters, I would say that a lot of people find it inspiring to see someone who is so morally incorruptible, especially considering the very corrupt world that we live in now. Why do people say that Superman is impossible to write for when Captain America has been one of the most popular characters in the MCU for years? For some reason, in the infancy of the DCEU, they were kind of obsessed with giving us new and unique interpretations of these characters as their first introduction to us. Although I completely welcome new and original ideas with open arms, I think some recent successful adaptations of comic book characters have proven to us that people want to see the characters they know and love as they remember them from the comic books. Characters like Shazam, Harley Quinn, Black Panther, Deadpool, Wonder Woman, and Miles Morales, and so many more have proven that making these stories unique doesn't necessarily mean changing fundamental aspects of these characters. Although I welcome ingenuity, I think it's almost refreshing in a weird way to see characters portrayed in faithful ways. I don't need to see a dark and gritty version of every comic book character. I've kinda seen that and I'm pretty sick of it, and instead, I'd argue that it's time to go back to what makes these characters who they are. It's almost a cliche at this point to pair Superman with the idea of hope. This quality is almost inseparable from the character. In fact, in Man of Steel, the insignia on his chest doesn't stand for Superman. Instead, it's a symbol for something else.
What's the S stand for?
It's not an S. On my world, it means hope.
Now, despite this fact, there has been a lot of discussion regarding the idea of hope in Man of Steel, and how the film in and of itself is almost completely lacking of hope. Which, although is an argument I do understand, I don't entirely agree with. The hope that I see in Man of Steel is in Kal-El as a Kryptonian coming to a new world. Superman is unsure of whether or not to trust the humans or to rebuild Krypton and save his race. When Superman kills Zod, he is placing his hope in humanity and not in his own race. And I think that's where a lot of people get frustrated with the film, is there doesn't seem to be a lot of hope from the people of Earth onto Superman. Instead, it's the other way around. This uneasiness that the people of Earth have about Superman is directly addressed in Batman v Superman. But in the next film, I think this is a prime opportunity for the hope that Superman has in humanity to be returned to him. Seeing Superman resurrected from the dead, I think, has the opportunity to inspire the people of Earth, and they can place their trust in his hands, the hands of this all-powerful alien. Now, regardless of your opinion of Man of Steel, or Batman v Superman, or even Superman Returns, I think everyone can agree that Superman needs to be a beacon of hope. And looking around at what is happening in the world right now, I think a little hope is exactly what we all need.